Kryptina slowly approached the cage as she still noticed a brown-colored scent leading towards the cage. Hello? Kryptina stepped forward. She saw glowing red eyes appear. Only a vampire can make another. The red glowing eyes stepped out of the dark, and Kryptina realized it was another vampire who was in the cage. Kryptina coughed as she noticed there was a wreath of garlic hanging on top of the lock. The vampire bat was black with long brown hair. She had rib cages as if she hadn't drank any blood in months. The bat flew to the bottom of the cage to get a closer look at the girl she saw. Where is the vampire that bit you? She looked back and forth with worry. Is he alright? Is he undead? Where is Alaric? The bat stepped towards her again with worry. You're Alaric's mother! Kryptina smiled with joy and stepped towards her. Oh, thank Dracula, you're safe. Alaric and Thorn will both be so happy. They're both waiting for you in the castle. Kryptina looked towards the window and turned back to Alaric's mother. You mean they're still here? In the forest? No, no! Alaric's mother waved her head back and forth. They must go! But we have to rescue you. How do I get you out? Kryptina looked back and forth to see if there was anything she could use. If I can just get the lock. Kryptina tried to undo the lock, but she stopped when she noticed the garlic was still on there. She quickly turned away from it. I can't get rid of the garlic. Then they suddenly heard angry humans from close by. Where is the vampire? You'll be killed if Van Helsing sees you. He shouldn't have bitten you. Get Alaric in the school and leave. It's not safe for our kind here. Alaric's mother's eyes watered. Kryptina looked back at her, feeling sorry for her until her eyes widened with fear as she noticed a set of large vampire fangs hanging on the wall. There was also a long black hat, a long black cape, and a staff. Kryptina's eyes began to water as she saw the plaque where the fangs were hanging. The bottom of the plaque had a name writing in signature, golden color. Ozel von Horrificus. Kryptina covered her mouth and looked away as her eyes began to water. She knew Alaric and Thorn would be waiting. How will she ever tell them the truth? She turned towards Alaric's mother, feeling worried for her. But Alaric won't leave. She was cut off by Alaric's mother. She narrows her eyes at her, making fists. He must not come for me. He must not wait for me. He must run, and so should you, girl, now! Kryptina immediately ran behind the cage like lightning when the door swung open. She noticed she had suddenly gotten even faster than she was on the first night. Kryptina was hiding behind the cage, and she peeked to see Abraham Van Helsing holding 2 wooden stakes and aiming them around the room as if he was attacking a clan of vampires. He was dressed in a long purple cloak and a long purple hat. Abraham Van Helsing stepped towards the window and opened it. He puts his hands together as he closed his eyes with frustration. Lord, what must I do? I left to help others hunt vampires only to return for more. This wicked land must be civilized. That is your will. He opens his eyes with anger as he took out a wooden cross and turned to the vampire bat that was still trapped in a cage. Abraham Van Helsing stepped towards the cage and kneeled down looking at the vampire bat. So, vampire, tomorrow I will show them I have tamed you just like I have tamed this land. They will have nothing to fear if they trust in the Lord's will. What the? His eyes widened with shock as he realized Kryptina was behind the cage. Abraham Van Helsing quickly sets his wooden stake on his bow and tried to shoot Kryptina. Kryptina immediately transformed into a bat, and she flew towards the window, but before she could leave, she turned towards poor Alaric's mother, who was still trapped in a cage. If only the garlic wasn't sitting on top of the lock, she would have been able to free her from Van Helsing. Tell Alaric and Oxblood to lead the school to safety. Now go! Alaric's mother cried. Abraham Van Helsing took out another wooden stake and set it on his bow. He aimed for Kryptina and fired, but before the stake could strike her, Kryptina flew out the window. Abraham Van Helsing quickly rushed towards the window holding his wooden cross. He looked around to see Kryptina was nowhere in sight. Kryptina headed towards her open window and crawled into bed. She put the covers over her whole body. She rested the pillow over her face and shut her eyes. Kryptina was enjoying her sleep until she suddenly felt someone shaking her. "Hey, Kryptina, why is there a pillow over your face?" "What? Huh?" Kryptina opened her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Your pillow was over your face. Is everything all right?" Chester asked, resting his hand on her cheek. "Wait. Oh yeah, everything's fine." Kryptina grabbed her braid. "Hey," Chester smiled at her. "Lydia and Maddie are gonna need extra help today." "Well, is it okay if I can go down during the evening instead?" Kryptina asked. "Of course you can." Chester got up and opened the door a little more. He turned back to her. "Hey, is there something you're not telling me?" "What? No, everything's fine." She laid down. "I just prefer evenings, that's all. Like when you used to see me go out all night." She turned away, hoping her brother will believe her. "Okay then." Chester shut the door and exited the house. Kryptina got up and looked down at her lynx Snowy. Kryptina sat down at her desk and she began to write a letter. She then puts the piece of paper into a small brown bag. Kryptina turned to Snowy and placed the bag onto her back. "Here, take this, Snowy, and please send it to Alaric." She opened the window for her. "At least you can be free." She smiled at Snowy and patted her on her head. Snowy jumped out the window and she was gone. Kryptina and Chester walked through the city and entered Abraham Van Helsing's castle. Kryptina's eyes began to water with sadness. "Oh, thank goodness you're finally here," Maddie said with a smile. She was holding a broomstick in her hand. "Here you go." She gives her the broomstick. "You can start over there while Lydia and I will finish stacking the books." Kryptina slowly turned to look at her brother Chester. He glared at her. "This is for your own good." He turned away from her and exited the castle without looking back at her. Hours have passed, as Kryptina was stuck cleaning the castle from top to bottom with the other maids, while Alaric sat on the tree branch waiting for Kryptina's return. Alaric laid down on the bench, crossing his arms, beginning to feel bored until he saw Snowy leap onto the tree branch to greet him. "Kryptina?" Alaric sat up. "What in Dracula's name took you so—" He was cut off as he realized he didn't smell the scent of Kryptina, and she was nowhere in sight. Snowy nudged him as she purred. "Huh?" He opens the brown bag on Snowy's back and takes out the note. He read it and he began to narrow his eyes. He rolls up the paper and tosses it away. "I'm not leaving!" He made fists. "She promised! Help me find her, Snowy!" Snowy ran towards the city as Alaric transformed into a bat, following her from behind. He flew on top of a house and transformed back into himself. He looked around the whole city and sniffed the air. Kryptina was sweeping the floor. "Hey, Lydia?" Maddie leaned in with a smirk. "You wouldn't believe what just happened to me 4 nights ago," she said with a giggle. "What?" Lydia asked as she was petting her raven. "I got attacked and bitten by a real vampire." She lifted her hand and whispered. Kryptina could hear everything they were saying as she continued sweeping the floor. "Oh, really?" Lydia crossed her arms. "I know you don't believe in them, but today is the day I tell everyone the story of how it happened." She got out a ladder and she climbed it, stacking the books away. "Vampires? I. Lydia rolled her eyes and giggled. She picked up the stack of books and headed towards the bookshelves. Kryptina set the broom down and picked up a bag of laundry. She noticed it felt more heavy than usual. How can laundry be this heavy? Then she suddenly heard a familiar voice before she could carry the laundry outside to dry. "Where were you?" She gasped and dropped the laundry. "Alaric?" Kryptina opened her hands with surprise. "What are you doing here? I sent Snowy to you. Lead the school to safety." But you said you would help me." Alec looks at her with sadness. His eyes began to tear. "Listen," Kryptina grabbed him by the arms. "Van Helsing will kill all the vampires by sunrise. You have to get them, okay? Do you understand?" She looked at him with sadness. "You said you would help me." Alec opened his hands with disappointment. Kryptina turned away. "I'm helping you the only way I can." She crossed her arms as tears began to fall from her eyes. "Take Snowy with you. Goodbye." "But you promised me a vampire's loyalty." Kryptina looked away, sobbing, and she closed the door. "Urgh!" Alec looked down at the bat amulet and ripped it off his neck. He hissed as he crushed the alien and threw it into the laundry basket. He quickly transformed into a bat and flew out the window. "Come on, dear, let's go." Maddie sat down her pile of books. She turns to Kryptina, who was almost done sweeping the floor. "Come on, dear, he wants everyone. That means you too." Kryptina looked at her. Maddie turns to her. "They brought that cage. It's up on the stage." "What?" Kryptina dropped the broomstick with shock. "Oh no!" She opened her hands with worry. She quickly rushed outside. Alaric was eating bugs and drinking tomato juice as some people looked at him weirdly. He kept on eating until he heard humans talking. "I heard he's got vampires!" Danny and his friends came running right by him. Danny was holding up his sword and a wooden stake while his friends were holding the cage. "Won't that be interesting to see?" one of the men asked. "Do you suppose he's going to stake it?" another man whispered. "Oh yes, it is a monster," a woman said with a laugh. "Mother? Father? Mother! Father!" Alaric hissed as he quickly ran through the group of people. "Crazy child!" the woman cried. Kryptina looked to see a large audience of people gathering around. She saw Abraham Van Helsing on the stage, ordering his hunters to set this cage nicely on the stage. "Further, further, okay, now that's enough, now step away." Abraham Van Helsing waved his hand. His hunters exited the stage and stood on the side of the area. "People, listen to me!" Abraham Van Helsing took out a wooden cross. "I have heard your concern here. Vampires attacking humans in our city. Vampires attacking sheep last week. A vampire running through our very streets last night." He waved his wooden cross in the air. Kryptina was watching Abraham Van Helsing until she heard a hiss from behind her. She turned to see it was Alaric running towards her. "Alaric, what are you doing here?" She grabbed him by the arm. "I told you to leave." He turns to her and hisses, "Let me go! I have to find my parents!" He began hissing and moving around, trying to get her to let go. Kryptina knew how strong Alaric is, and she knew she couldn't keep this up forever. She knew that if this goes on forever, someone will see them. She looked at Danny and his friends. Danny was on top of the table holding up his sword and taking out his wooden stake while his friends cheered for him. Kryptina continued holding Alaric while he was still wiggling around. Hey you! Over here!"